And we will get started. I'll keep an eye to see if anyone joins us from the waiting room. But thank you all for your time and in the service of attending to this topic today. We will get through it. So it is somehow the middle of June. We're at June 17th. And we are on our ninth offering within this webinar series for building strong foundations on early childhood mental health. Today, we're going to be focusing on relationships within early care settings and the strategies within those settings to really support children uh, building relationships and the importance of that task within that setting. So we will get started. For those of you that have joined us previously, we always record these so that your colleagues and or you can have access to this later. Haley usually disseminates that on a uh, I was going to say listserv, but playlist is the word that I was looking for. A playlist on the YouTube channel, and we'll send the slides and any additional resources as well as follow up. So you'll get that in a little bit. And thank you to Haley and Randy and others that are part of the Mental Health and Recovery Board of Union County for the opportunity to share this full webinar series with you all. I would imagine by now, most of you have already joined us for one or more of these. I recognize many names by now, but this is really a little bit more than halfway through our what we're hoping to be sort of a comprehensive overview of infant and early childhood mental health. So starting with the foundations around attachment, how do we understand behavior in kids 0 to 5, the context of trauma and toxic stress within those very young kids and what that presentation looks like, the importance of reflective practices for adults within the work of infant and early childhood mental health. We spoke in April about the context of caregivers and their own mental health within presentations and work with very young kids. We talked about the context of fathers and grand-led families within early childhood spaces and the importance and growth of the field in really acknowledging them there. We talked last time, which was the end of May, right before the holiday, around understanding developmental differences and within this period of rapid developmental growth. And then today we're talking about relationships and early care settings after the 4th of July, which is crazy that that's only a few weeks away. We're going to be talking about observation and assessment within this context of very young kids, and some of the strategies, both with relational observation and direct assessment and observation of how young kids present. We're going to talk about the link between language and social development in July, later in July, and then we'll close out with uh, understanding sort of strategies around supporting regulation in early childhood, since that's underpinning all of this work. So that's a little bit more to come and a little bit of what we'll do today. I think you all know me by now, but my name is Kate Sweeney. I'm a clinical social worker by training. I'm within the faculty at UConn's School of Social Work, getting to partner with the Union County Board on this particular grant, but have the opportunity to do that in a lot of different places, really supporting the infusion of infant and early childhood mental health, whether it's awareness or specific EBPs within a range of community settings. And it's the work that I've done since getting my master's degree in clinical social work. So I'm lucky to call this my career. Our goal for today. So as I said, we're really going to be focusing on the power and utility and intentionality around relationships within early care and educational settings, and how we sort of think about children within that sort of group care and group setting and group relational opportunity, knowing that within the field of early childhood, I mean, you haven't heard me go through any one of these and not talk about the context of relationships and environment. So relationships are so very, very key. for kids during this time. I mean, people in general, right? We even have all of this new news about different loneliness epidemics for adults and that sort of thing. We know that relationships are important as for humans, but within the context of very young kids, the degree of that importance is just dialed up so much more. Partially because they're dependent on us for so many different things, and because they're learning about and making meaning of human interactions and of the world, and so the relationships are their context to do that. So whether they have a very responsive, primary caregiver or a very unresponsive primary caregiver, that's going to impact how they understand that dynamic and then how they apply it to other relationships. And the sort of, it has so much to do with just the context of their environment. So we're going to talk a lot today about relationship-based practices, about this idea of primary caregiving and what does that mean? What do those two words mean? We think about that within a family context, but how do we think about that within an early care and educational context? So the caregivers, the child care providers, the teachers that are working with kids. Um, and that like all of the things that we know with respect to attachment and stability apply in those settings. So the idea of emotional security and that really being either an additive context to a child's growth and development or something that can be destabilizing is really an important context here. So we hope that by the end of this hour, you'll walk away with what you see on the right. So understanding those are old objectives. I apologize. Those are not our objectives for right now. Our objectives are on the left then. It's really to go over that context. And I apologize about the error on the screen. Um, these are two review slides that you've seen in all of them, really to kind of ground us in this idea of anything that we're talking about with respect to infant and early childhood mental health applies these things. So as you can see, relationships are central. So we're going to be talking about them in a different context or setting today, but they've always been vitally important. Talking about the idea that development happens within the context of family, culture, and community, and that all of those things come into play with respect to the early care and educational settings as well. So a child's culture, a child's, the either continuity or distinct differences between a child's family setting and their educational setting, and their educational setting becomes part of their community. So the idea that when relationships are thought about there, that's supportive of infant and early childhood mental health development and skills. And when they're not, that can be detrimental to those same things. And the idea that we're always going to be focusing on strengths-based and prevention work within this age group. And this is again the second of two review slides. So from this, we'll add new information, I promise. But really just giving you again the grounding of the definition of infant and early childhood mental health as the developing capacity between the age of birth and 5 years to do three things. So form close relationships, to experience, tolerate, and express a range of emotions without lasting collapse, and to explore the environment and learn. And as you can see, all of those things already fit really easily into today's topic. So going back one slide, wanting to invite you all to sort of just reflect a moment, and if you are willing, either go off of mute or type in the chat. But it's a time when a relationship helped you feel safe, calm, and connected within a group setting. So you don't have to share the particular relationship or the context, but thinking about a group setting, and these could be sort of positive things as well, but where there are sort of moments of maybe positive stress. So maybe it's when you are walking into a new classroom for the first time, right? Or a new school, or I clearly I have the transition of the end of the school year in mind. But it could be or it could be when you were in a large setting and there was a fire alarm and you didn't know what to do, right? But thinking about like what about the relationship that was contextual in that setting helped you feel supported. So again, invite folks to either go off of mute or type in the chat, or just take a moment to reflect yourself as well. I'm seeing the chat is still quiet, but wanting to offer maybe a few thoughts here. Often it's that you're not alone, right? So even in a large group, right? If it's again the sort of the like positive stress of like walking into your high school for the first time, and but knowing that your good friend who you've gone to school with since second grade is in the same class, right? That idea that like the you're in a large group setting, so you're not physically alone, but it can feel like you're on your own, right? But that relationship can be sort of stabilizing. So having that in mind as the importance of relationships, and often what people think of are moments that are more recent than when they were younger. And again, just like the idea that our dependence from the early childhood perspective is so much higher. Than it is even as adults. And that children like us rely on relationships to feel secure enough to explore, learn, and connect. So when we see children that are really not interacting with their environment, there can be certainly some organic considerations within them that is leading to that. But often it is, that absence of feeling like they have a relationship to help them explore, or that the relationship gave them some security to do so. I just want to note, Lindsay, thanks for chiming in. So, as a school guidance counselor, was very the school guidance counselor was very welcoming to my child when they walked in his classroom for the first time. Oh, in pre-K, yeah, when their backpacks are bigger than them, right? She was calm and got down on his level, yeah, and he felt more comfortable. It was me, but I saw it was my son. That's great. Orientation person made eye contact with me and later learned that he was connected to the founding of our home office. So calmed and felt accepted because of that connection. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, again, just those sort of brief, and again, these are sort of brief moments of connection. These are sort of, a lot of these are sort of micro efforts of, eye contact, getting down on someone's level, but that those can be so settling to an individual whose nervous system otherwise feels a little overwhelmed. Thank you both for chiming in the chat. I appreciate it. So again, this context of relationships are foundational for young kids, and that a lot of times when people that are not in the field of infant mental health sort of think about that, you think about attachment, right? You think when you hear attachment or you think about relationships in young kids, you think of, parents or biological or family caregivers that are, feeding, clothing, changing babies and young kids. That is certainly an incredibly important consideration here. But when we're thinking about relationships within early care and educational settings, I mean, often we know based on either family need or just the reality of the structure of the day. When kids are in care, they're often with the adults that are caring for them in these settings more than they are. The hours are more than they're with their parents and or biological family or home family. Um, and so thinking about, the weight of that carrying into the relationships that these educators have with young kids. And that, that this plays into this idea of secure attachment. So when caregivers respond consistently to a child's need, it creates a secure attachment. This teaches children that the world is safe, right? So that I have a predictable response from this person. This person sort of knows me in some way. And even though I might not know what the day or the activity or the task is that we're going to be doing, I know this person, right? So, and you'll hear often, especially for individual children, that within a care setting where there's um, some disruptive behavior often, that like if a given teacher isn't there that day, it's harder, right? And seeing that sort of as just an illustration of how calming and regulating that relationship is for that child. And knowing that when that is absent, it's not with intent that that child is more dysregulated. It's just the expression of their reality at that time. And so seeing that not as intentional, not as defiant, but as realistic for how they're doing. And often we hear, and you'll often, hear therapists and others tell adults and tell parents that, he's harder on you because you're his safe place, right? Because, parents can feel like, you held it together all day at school and that you came home and were defiant or fell apart or didn't do that task. But often that is an illustration of how safe that relationship feels for that child. So this idea that this gets replicated within early care settings as well, that trusted relationships give children a safe space to express and work through powerful feelings. So that I know that it's safe to tell that person I'm mad or I'm frustrated or whatever it might be. And it might be with words and it might be with my body, but that becomes a safe place to do that. Um, I'm just attending to Annette's note in reflection, security in the environment and caregivers is so important as an ECMH visiting classroom. Um, I sense a child feels secure when they come and share their activity. This can take time. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And some kids are gonna, just like adults, like are gonna be sort of quicker to be able to build those relationships or sort of invite you into that level of interaction with them, and some will take much longer. Thanks, Annette, for that. I appreciate it. So some other ways. So this is the first way. So the one of the ways that relationships are foundational is that they support emotional regulation and resilience. So through secure attachment and a safe haven for expression. Two other ways that we know that relationships are foundational for children, and again, apply not only in home or family settings, but into the early care and educational setting, is through this idea, through both cognitive brain development and social skills and empathy. So through this idea of serve and return, and you guys have heard me talk about this before in a couple of the other um, webinars and within the series, but serve and return is a foundational idea within infant and early childhood mental health that talks about the idea. I think you think of tennis, right? This idea that a baby or a young child will try to get attention or sort of have interaction. They'll serve with either a giggle or a laugh or eye contact, and then how much does that adult like return back and forth? And you'll see this when you're doing observations within a classroom or within a child care setting. How much of that interaction is that sort of dynamic of serve and return and really being responsive to where the individual child is. And you'll see a video of some examples of this in a minute, versus how much of the adult interaction with the children is really just focused on the task or the teaching, versus this idea of really kind of serving and returning and being more attuned with where the individual child is or what they need. Um, and then this idea of giving them the cues that they are confident to explore the setting, right? Really grows the brain. But that the kids, babies and very young kids, will often rely on key relationships with adults, and sometimes key peers, to get the cues that the environment is safe to do so. So we think about this with very, very young kids. You think we've talked before about this idea of circle of security, and that when you go into, a new setting, be it a playground or walk into a new room with a family member, their cues to you as to like, go play, this is great, or I'm watching you from here, versus like more hovering is going to give them cues as to how safe am I to kind of really venture out and explore and learn from this environment versus, what the cues that I'm getting from this important adult that I need to sort of not explore as much and stay from them. So often when you explore, you're encountering things that are going to help with brain development. And when you don't, you're not. Um, and this third idea of relationships as foundational is falls into the category of social skills and empathy. Obviously, all of these things are intertwined, but this is sort of the structure of the sort of three ways that we know that relationships are foundational for young kids. And the one is modeling behavior. So just the same way that kids understand, how to deal with something if something falls or if I need something, that kids learn from caregivers within educational and care settings, how they model, if a page in the book is missing, or they were going to go outside and it's raining and so they can't, right? Like, how do they model problem solving? How do they model, labeling emotions, sort of all of those, communicating about change of plans, et cetera. And that is done both intentionally and just also observationally from kids, that they're constantly taking that in. Um, and that, the other sort of example of how they're learning social skills through relationships is the idea of sort of boundaries, that the more sort of structured the relationships are, that they learn a great deal from that. Allowing them to understand sort of personal boundaries, allowing them to grasp concepts like consent, respect, and active listening. And a lot of times this can be done through intentional teaching with peers within the classrooms. And again, some kids are going to need a lot more sort of tertiary or targeted support of this, and some kids will be able to sort of be more innate in their ability to kind of observe and integrate this themselves. But when we think about relationship-centered responses, so much of the tasks of the educators and childcare providers within early care and educational settings, we think about it as school readiness, right? We think about it primarily in our society as academic, but that what we know is that so much of this, because a lot of that is based on regulation, and that the brain grows through regulation. Any academics is going to come secondary to these sort of relationship-centered responses. I think one of the challenges is that that's not always how educators or childcare providers are brought into the work. And so a lot of what they end up doing is learning through on the job, or sort of through folks like Courtney or others that are mental health consultants, or coaches or others, to come in and kind of help them dial up the needle with respect to some of the strategies that you see here, to really allow for relationship-centered work so that those other tasks can happen. So people are called in to sort of add these things when there's a problem, to kind of settle the environment in general. Um, just admitting a few other people from the room. But you can see here, so this idea of really like leaning into co-regulation. And of course, that's going to look differently when you're, one-on-one at home with a family member versus if you're in a classroom and there's two adults and, 18 young kids. But, you can see a lot of opportunity for support and co-regulation if it's a child that needs a hand on their back, or a child that needs to be closer in proximity to you to be able to regulate during a given activity. The idea of predictability within routines, settles relationships. Again, this idea of stability and safety are all things that young kids are looking for to be able to unlock their ability to kind of learn from and explore the environment. Visual supports can really help with that dynamic, so that it doesn't get sort of lost in the sort of physiological, like, defiance or upset in the moment, but visual supports can kind of bring that dyad back to sort of negotiating a given moment. Following the child's lead is referencing that sort of serve and return, the idea of, are these interactions not just teacher led, but are a good portion of them at least child led as well. So that if a child comes to a teacher and says, I want you to play with me, or I need your help with X, Y, or Z, that there's that give and take in the dynamic as well. That the adult is sort of pouring as much into that as well, and then that pays dividends with respect to just the child's feelings about the relationship, their feeling of sort of being seen and securely held there. The idea of sort of reducing sensory overwhelm can often be needed individually for kids, and using strengths-based language are all supportive, intentionally done. But as I said, like kind of not always on the forefront of educators' minds when they come into this work, and so often requires either a consultant or a coach or a director or a program going through, whether it be conscious discipline or pyramid model strategies, to kind of really onboard this into their settings. And once you see these things become part of the milieu, and it's not just about the tasks or the transition or the circle time activity, you'll see kind of the room settle, and children's individual responses to the environment settle as well. Um, so, it's not just about helping a child. So this idea of the relationship-based work is not just about soothing a child who doesn't feel okay in the moment. It is that, but it's also about really facilitating the opportunity for brain growth, that, connection supports regulation, emotional safety supports learning, and that relationships shape brain development. And that kids learn often. You will see an explosion of a child's language ability when they're in like a group care setting. And it can be, either a large classroom, it can also be just within a family home. Um, Childcare, but when they're in sort of a new setting with more than one adult or more than one child, because they're sort of navigating that, you see so much brain growth. And so children often benefit from relationships with different adults or the opportunity to navigate different settings with different adults. And that, but underlining that is the importance of sort of thinking about stability of relationships in those settings as well. Um, And this is where we get into the idea of continuity of care. And so, if anyone has paid any attention to, any of the conversations at the national level and local community levels as well around just what staffing and in early care and education and actually education, globally looks like. It's a very, very stressed workforce. And so we see a lot of turnover. We see a lot of you know, uh, uh, staffing ratio concerns, even if, and turnover can be people leaving a different sort of center or program or school. It can also be just sort of change in, okay, you're now in this classroom or you're in this classroom based on ratios or whatever it might be. And we know that some kids can tolerate that and tolerate sort of the stress of navigating, okay, a new adult is in charge of me today and I need to sort of learn their cues and all of that. But it is very stressful for kids in general to sort of not have continuity of care within those settings. And for kids that have a higher level of developmental or emotional needs, the degree of which continuity of care is important is dialed up even higher. But the same way that we think about sort of these key relationships with respect to families, as I said already this hour, they really play into the idea of, all the things that you see here around trust, emotional regulation, reducing stress, increasing predictability. And smoother transitions within those settings for kids. It's also highly stressful for those adults to learn, the needs and names and et cetera of a whole new group of kids frequently. So, and you can see that, again, this idea that we're not just responding to children's stress within the environment, but that the children are responding to the adult stress. So when there can be that stability, you can see just so again, the whole sort of environment and system relax and regulate. A couple of models of this when there is the ability is that teachers will move with kids, and you'll see this done mostly in charter schools, but teachers will you'll have a pre-K or kindergarten teacher actually like graduate with the kids into kindergarten and first and second grade. Um, and that can there's been a lot of different studies about again sort of the stability of that for those kids that relationship becomes so deep that their individual sort of needs and cues become so known, and that then sort of the tasks of that academic setting becomes a much easier lift. So it's a cool concept to think about when the system has the ability to do that. And I feel like I've already sort of naturally talked through this, but that there are barriers to this. And I just want to acknowledge that. But that so often, individual kids get blamed for the stress of sort of lack of adult stability or within that setting. And that, there are real sort of system crises, I would say, at this point with respect to early care and education workforce within our society today in America. And so none of us on this call can adjust that. But trying to think about what small shifts can strengthen continuity and connection when possible within a setting. Where are places that we can move the needle to really think first about stability of caregivers within those settings, or the importance of that or as a factor, right? Okay, so we've gone through kind of the context and the importance, and then we're going to talk a little bit now for the rest of the hour about how strategies that we can use and employ and think about to really support regulation and behavior within group environments, all with respect to relationships being key. So we're going to start with a brief video, and I think I've done all the things to ensure that this plays smoothly, but if you can't hear sound, if somebody could let me know, that would be great.
Building positive, nurturing relationships with the children in your care is the single most critical thing you can do as an early childhood provider. But why is it so important? And what are some of the things you can do to help foster strong, positive relationships with children?
The relationships are a cornerstone of children's ability to develop those social skills and those self-regulation skills, the ability to understand their own emotions and respond appropriately to the emotions of others.
When they're so young, they only function within a relationship. So when that relationship is a quality, responsive, nurturing relationship, a child then feels that sense of security and trust, and they begin to develop a sense of self-esteem, self-regulation. They begin to manage those emotions. And within that relationship, when they feel safe and secure, then they also feel like, now I can explore. I can venture out. I can discover what's over here. I can try new things. And that exploration is the true piece of learning.
It's important to build relationships with children because they're with you most of the day. The only way they're going to get through is bonding with you and creating that relationship, playing with them, just spending that time with them.
Children really need to feel connected to the people around them. They have to feel understood. One of the questions I pose to caregivers and teachers is, what are your essential messages that you want to be giving to kids? Why are you a teacher in the first place? There are teachers who will say, I want children to feel safe in my classroom. I want children to feel loved. How do the children know it? Well, I greet every single kid in the morning. I am affectionate with kids. I'm sensitive to when they need some encouragement.
What makes you think she will be so happy? I can tell you're really happy making it for her too.
Yeah, those are all very concrete ways to get across your message. And you're communicating to children with every piece of how you're reacting to them and acting with them.
I definitely think that we always make sure the children know that we're there for them. Always acknowledging their actions, their words, paying attention, letting them know that we want to listen to them.
I talk to them all the time, sing to them. When they're not feeling good, I hold them, make them feel comfortable. When they're teething, they're feeling sad, and just nurture them all the time, like they're my own kids. And that's how it feels sometimes anyways.
So I really try to get to know my students in the first month of school. So I know all of my students' brothers and sister names and their pets and all of their interests, and they really respect me for that.
Responsive caregiving really is responding to the individual needs of each child, thinking about each child as an individual, developing on their own trajectory at their own rate, and you responding to them as they develop. When we're looking at infants, we're looking at responding to their cues, how promptly and how appropriately we're responding to those cues. You can see how are they responding when you look at them, or you stick out your tongue with your face, your tone of voice, and you're singing a song, you're being playful, and show different sorts of feelings and facial expressions to a baby. So all of those are those positive interactions that happen during the daily routine. When you're feeding them, when you're diapering them, just really paying attention to, I'm not feeding them, this is just a task, but thinking about the quality of that relationship and how you're developing that bond with that child. And that emotional bond then becomes a very strong relationship, and that's how it develops a secure attachment.
Trust and attachment is a large part of early infancy. You really need to know the child
And that may take some time. It may take going over to them 4 or 5 times and they're not really responding, and then sitting back and saying, well, let's try a different strategy.
In preschool, how do you become responsive if you're setting up this curriculum?
We are going to help them first.
If you have that every child must sit down and cut today with scissors because you're trying to develop their fine motor skills, you're really not paying attention to or responding to the needs of that child. So it's about really finding that balance, developing all of the skills that you want to see for them to be ready for school, but really responding to what it is they really like.
Each day I have a plan with what I'm going to do, but sometimes they'll take it in another direction. And you have to be able to step back and watch what they're doing. We always need to let children create and do things and take their own interests. Sometimes there are skills that I want children to work on, and they might not be interested in it. Like I might want them to be writing a letter, and they don't really want to do it at that point. But I know they love sand, so I'll put out a little sand table, and they can make little squiggles and circles in the sand, and they're developing that fine motor. You can teach through those materials that children are interested in.
Oh, I think you came up with another way to get.
So I'll stop it there. Like all great videos online, it's a long video. So and I'm happy to send the link if anybody wanted to sort of see some more examples. But I think some really great examples at an age of a range of age ranges, not an age, a range of age ranges. That's hard to say. That really sort of show that serve and return. Any key takeaways or thoughts about sort of what you saw in those videos or themes? And again, invite folks. I'm happy to read the chat or happy to have you go off of mute as well. I think a lot of, one of the themes that I saw there was really sort of fitting that sort of serve and return and relational moments into the daily tasks, right, of changing or feeding or supporting. And then really the idea of individualization came in a lot, especially in the preschool one, right, around, how do you know the children and know what will help them within that setting um, or help them with that task. I love serve and return, Diana says. This idea that it connects the interaction instead of the performance. Yeah. Um, yeah, just showing joy with your children. Exactly. Thank you. Um, and that like, in a moment where there's sort of stress or tension between, adults and young kids, the idea of sort of going back to that, right? So getting off task a little bit, but going back to that idea of how do we sort of understand the child's cues and sort of get back to that interaction can be so settling for many. And we know that, just like, kids can be drawn to certain peers, for certain adults, it can be, easier to interact with some kids versus others. And so I think, if you're one of the people that steps into that dynamic, helping kind of bring back those sort of small effort interactions to support the stability of that relationship can be very important. Okay, because for some, group settings can be joyful and stimulating. For some, or on some days, it can be overwhelming and dysregulating. And again, that can be based on a child's temperament or their own sort of organic presentation or development. It can also be on a given day they're super tired or not feeling well, right? Or this particular task is hard for them. And so, trying to think about, when you think about some of the things you saw in those videos, applying it to group-based settings, how do we individualize or sort of know the individual cues of different children in care based on that relationship and the data that we get from that, to be supportive, and to be predictive of their ability to interact in that task. The example of letting a child sort of draw in the sand with their finger instead of on the paper with a pencil is a great one, right? So it's you know, a structured choice. You're adjusting the task, but you're not saying that you wouldn't, you know, that they're not only having one way to be successful in that activity. They're still learning the fine motor task of making a P or an L or whatever the letter might be, right? Um, okay, so some ways to kind of really foster belonging and inclusion within group settings. So again, whether it be family child care homes or sort of more sort of classroom-based settings, children need to feel seen, welcome, valued, and represented to feel included and to feel that they belong. So, you know, there's some real specific strategies that you can do, including inviting family photos. It's a great way at the beginning of the year to kind of have families like either fill out like a all about my child document or make posters about their family that have pictures. Those can often be useful as well when, you know, kids are having a hard time or sort of miss mom or dad or granddad or aunt and are able to kind of go and say hi to their picture. Um, to have materials and books in the classroom that are inclusive and of the community and cultures that are within the classroom and the setting. To have greeting rituals that can vary by kids, but again, this idea of, you know, this is my one-on-one, you know, handshake in the morning with my teacher or whatever it might be. Again, those ideas of sort of you're feeding the relationship through responsive interactions that can sometimes have a slower build, but you know, that's how you let a child know that you're there for them. The idea of peer connection, and a lot of times, again, some kids can come into this really innately, and some kids might need a lot more structure around it, or some, you know, again, some individual sort of coaching or practice with it. And you know, the importance of really inviting family members into the space, and that can be through like volunteer opportunities, that can be through specific, you know, you know, evenings or sort of offerings or pickup times. But you know, how do we again, like, you know, kind of really invite them there so that they can learn more about their child's space, that their child can carry that as well, especially when there's distinct differences between home and school settings and the importance of just sort of exposure to that, right? A little bit more around relationship building strategies and practical supports within group settings. So, you know, you'll see here again, following kids' cues is such a sort of important context here. Having predictable routines and then having them help with those routines, like depending on sort of their time within the setting or sort of where you are within the calendar year of them. The idea of really kind of setting up small group interactions and sometimes even dyadic peer interactions so that like kids have the opportunity to sort of practice those relationships with peers as well and with you. The idea that, you know, any interaction offers some opportunity to emotionally coach around sort of that negotiation or that skill building or what went well, right? So never forget the opportunity to coach around or to give feedback when something went well as well. Often we only give feedback when or attend spend time sort of reflecting on or discussing when it didn't go well. But how do we think about doing that same thing when it did go well, and what that can do for a child feeling seen. And then this idea of sort of positive descriptive feedback, which is a bit of what I was just talking about, but this idea that you don't just say good job, but you really describe and give them feedback on the specifics of what went well. So your friend was really upset because there were no more tricycles for her to ride on the playground. You noticed that she was upset and you know came and got me for help. That was really nice of you, right? So this idea of you're really giving them feedback about why they're getting praise. And so it's sort of the total reverse of what we say as well, which is like, don't just say, no, don't do that, right? So don't just tell them what not to do. You have to tell them what to do. And then when they're doing something that is positive, you want to kind of echo that back to them. And really thinking about, you know, just observing the different sort of strengths with respect to relationships, both with adults and peers that kids come into the setting with, and when where they need different skill building, and just offering opportunities to practice and teach and reflect around that. Um, And just again, sort of a global takeaway that, the early care and educational settings are so important, not only to sort of get kids ready for the important sort of academic trajectories that they will have, at least through the age of 18, but really also around this idea of helping them continue to make meaning of relationships and people and interactions and dynamic and where and who they are in the world. And so children thrive in environments where relationships are intentional, responsive, and rooted in connection. And so often when you go into a space where it feels like, with respect to behavior, like everything is off the charts, like if you focus first on relationships and especially that responsivity in relationships, it can really unlock a lot. And that is so important to then use those relationships to utilize the strategies around teaching or supporting alternatives to a behavior that's challenging. It's very hard to do that when the child doesn't have a relationship with the adult that's going to give those instructions or guidance or teaching. So the idea of, if you leave this hour with anything, it's the perspective or thought that if you start with relationships, that's really, you're at the right place, and that's where the work needs to happen first, especially for very young kids, but really for us as well. Um, and as I said, we will have a few more of these. I'm happy to stay on if folks have questions. Haley will, with the recording and follow-up materials, send an evaluation link for you all to complete. Um, and again, I'm happy to stay on or sort of leave it open if folks have questions. And if not, I think we'll close it there and give you all a little bit of time back before your next meeting. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, Courtney, I'll definitely send you the full video for sure. I'll send that to Haley with follow-up. Thanks, everybody. Good to be with you today.